When a 90-year-old legend says something is his final word on a subject, you stop, you listen. And when that subject is Phil Mickelson, one of the most loved and most complicated figures in golf history, the entire golf world leans in. That is exactly what happened this week. Gary Player, the 9-time major champion, the man who defined an era alongside Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer, made a public statement about Phil Mickelson, and he used 3 words that hit harder than any golf shot either man ever struck. This broke my heart. Now, if you know anything about Gary Player, you know he does not throw words around carelessly. At 90, he has seen everything. He has played against the greats. He has watched the game evolve, fracture, and rebuild itself. He has been the voice of reason when golf needed one. So when he says something is his final statement about someone, and when he says that someone broke his heart, you have to ask, what happened? You might be thinking this is just another LIV golf drama, another old-timer shaking his fist at the modern game. But it is deeper than that, much deeper. This is not about politics or money or tours. This is about 2 legends, a bond that spanned decades, and a moment that changed everything between them. Here is my take. Do you think loyalty in golf still means what it used to? Or has the game changed so much that even the legends do not recognize it anymore? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if you care about the real stories behind the headlines, not the fluff, not the clickbait, but the truth about this game we love, hit that subscribe button, because this story is not over yet. Now, let us get into what Gary Player actually said, why he said it now, and what the hell broke his heart. But to really get that, we have to go back to the beginning, because this story did not start with a statement. It started with a friendship. Gary Player and Phil Mickelson were not just colleagues. They were connected. From the moment Phil burst onto the scene in the early 90s, Gary saw something in him, a fire, a fearlessness, and a short game that made Gary, arguably the best bunker player in history, nod in respect. Phil, for his part, never hid his admiration. He would talk about Gary like a kid talking about his hero. He studied Gary's fitness routines, his mental approach, his will to win. When Phil won his first major at the 2004 Masters, Gary was one of the first to call. He said Phil was finally fulfilling the potential he always knew was there. For years, that mutual respect held strong. Gary would praise Phil in interviews. Phil would mention Gary in his acceptance speeches. They shared a bond that went beyond golf. 2 men who understood what it took to win against the odds, who both carried themselves with a certain old-school dignity. Then everything started to shift. You know the timeline. Live Golf arrived. The game split in ways nobody predicted, and Phil Mickelson became the face of that rebellion. He put his reputation on the line. He said things that made the establishment wince. He walked away from the tour that made him a star. Now here is where it gets complicated. Gary Player did not immediately turn on Phil. In fact, in 2022, when the world was piling on Phil, Gary did something surprising. He defended him. He told reporters that Phil made a mistake, sure, but that we live in a judgmental society where people get crucified too quickly. He even called Phil personally, told him to hold his head high. Think about that. Gary Player, the ultimate traditionalist, the man who bled PGA Tour loyalty, stood up for Phil when it was the unpopular thing to do. So what changed? Because now, at 90 years old, Gary has declared his final statement about Phil. And those 3 words, "This broke my heart," they did not come out of nowhere. Something happened between that phone call and today. Something that made Gary feel not just disappointed, but personally wounded. And that is what we are here to unpack. But before we get to those exact words, and the moment Gary said them, we need to understand the deeper context, because this is not just about one comment. This is about what happens when 2 legends, 2 men who once looked at each other with nothing but respect, end up on opposite sides of a line that golf itself drew. That phone call in 2022 was Gary extending an olive branch. But what Phil did next made that olive branch feel like a wasted gesture. See, after Gary defended him, Phil did not exactly return the favor. He did not walk back his words. He did not try to mend fences with the tour or with the old guard. Instead, he doubled down. He kept pushing. He kept talking about how the system was broken, how the old ways were outdated, how players needed to look out for themselves. And for a man like Gary Player, that was hard to watch, because Gary did not come from privilege. He came from South Africa, from a time and place where opportunities were limited. He fought for everything he got. He built his career on discipline, respect, and gratitude for the game that gave him a life. He never forgot that golf was bigger than any one player. So when he saw Phil, a man he had once mentored, a man he had once defended, becoming the symbol of everything Gary felt was wrong with the modern game, it stung. It stung in a way that went beyond professional disagreement. This was personal. Now, you have to understand something about Gary Player at 90. He is not interested in playing political games. He is not interested in sugarcoating his feelings. At his age, he has earned the right to say exactly what he thinks. And what he thinks, what he has been thinking for a while now, is that Phil Mickelson lost his way. But here is the thing. Gary never said that publicly. Not directly. He would hint at it. He would talk about the importance of loyalty. He would talk about how the game gave him everything, and how he could never turn his back on it. But he never pointed a finger at Phil. Until now. The build-up to this moment took years. But the moment itself took only seconds. And those seconds changed how we will remember both men. So what exactly did Gary say? According to sources close to the situation, Gary Player was speaking at a private gathering when the topic of Phil Mickelson came up. Someone asked him, point blank, what he really thought about Phil's career choices, his move to LIV, his ongoing battle with the PGA Tour establishment. And Gary did not hesitate. He said he had watched Phil's career from the beginning. He said he had rooted for him, defended him, even loved him like a younger brother. But he said that watching Phil tear down everything the game stood for, watching him choose money over legacy, watching him burn bridges that took decades to build, that was the hardest thing he had ever witnessed in golf. Then he said it. Those 3 words. This broke my heart. And then he added something else. He said this would be his final public statement about Phil Mickelson. He was done talking about it, done defending him, done hoping he would come back. At 90, Gary Player was closing that chapter of his life for good. Now, think about the weight of that. Gary Player is not a man who gives up on people. He is not a man who abandons friendships easily. He has spent his entire life building relationships, mentoring younger players, giving back to the game. For him to say he is done, truly done with Phil Mickelson, that tells you how deep the wound goes. But here is where it gets even more painful. Gary did not just lose respect for Phil. He lost the hope that Phil would ever find his way back. And that hope, that belief that people can change, that redemption is always possible, that is what Gary Player has always stood for. He has spent decades talking about the power of forgiveness, the importance of second chances, the idea that it is never too late to do the right thing. So when he says he is done hoping, when he says his heart is broken, he is not just talking about disappointment. He is talking about grief. The grief of watching someone you love become someone you do not recognize. Now, you might be wondering, did Phil ever respond? Did he reach out to Gary after that statement? Did he try to explain himself, to apologize, to mend what was broken? The answer, as far as anyone knows, is no. Phil Mickelson has not publicly responded to Gary's final statement. He has not called him. He has not issued a statement. He has not done anything to suggest that Gary's words affected him in any way. And honestly, that silence might be the most telling part of this whole story. Because if Phil had responded, if he had shown even a hint of regret, even a flicker of the respect he once had for Gary, maybe things would be different. Maybe Gary would not have felt the need to make his feelings so final. Maybe there would still be a door open. But Phil stayed quiet. And in that quiet, Gary heard everything he needed to hear. Phil's silence spoke louder than any words could have. And that silence told Gary everything he already feared was true. This is where the story takes a turn that hits close to home for every golf fan who has ever felt like the game they loved was slipping away. Because Gary Player is not just speaking for himself. He is speaking for a generation of golfers and fans who feel like the sport they grew up with is disappearing. The traditions, the rivalries, the respect between players, the sense that golf was different from other sports, more gentlemanly, more honorable, all of that feels like it is fading. And Phil Mickelson, whether he meant to or not, became the face of that fading. Now, do not get me wrong. This is not about blaming Phil for everything. Golf was changing long before LIV came along. The money was getting bigger. The sponsors were getting louder. The lines between sport and business were blurring. Phil did not create that environment. He just walked into it and made his choice. But for Gary Player, that choice felt like a betrayal. Not because Phil left the tour. Not because he took Saudi money. Not because he said things that made the establishment uncomfortable. but because he did it in a way that seemed to dismiss everything Gary and his generation had built. Gary spent his entire career fighting for respect, for recognition, for the idea that golf was a noble pursuit. He played in an era when players were not millionaires, when they traveled the world on their own dime, when they played for the love of the game and the chance to win. And Phil, in Gary's eyes, threw all of that away for a paycheck. That is the real heartbreak. Not that Phil left, but that he made it look like none of it ever mattered. Now, we have to talk about something uncomfortable, because this story is not just about two golfers. It is about aging, about legacy, about what happens when the world you built starts to crumble around you. Gary Player is 90 years old. He knows he does not have many years left. He knows that every time he speaks, it could be the last time anyone hears him on a particular subject. That is why he called this his final statement. He wanted to say his piece, clearly and finally, so there would be no confusion about where he stood. And that is heartbreaking in its own way. Because what Gary is really saying, underneath all the disappointment and frustration, is that he is tired. He is tired of watching the game he loves change into something he does not recognize. He is tired of defending values that seem to matter less and less. He is tired of hoping that the people he mentored would carry those values forward. And at 90, he has decided to stop being tired. He has decided to stop hoping. He has decided to close the book and walk away from one of the most important relationships of his life. That takes courage, but it also takes a kind of resignation that is deeply sad. And here is the question that haunts me. When a man like Gary Player gives up on someone, does that mean the someone is beyond saving, or does it mean the man is just too old to keep fighting? I do not have the answer to that, but I know what Gary would say. He would say that everyone has a choice, and Phil made his. Now, let us talk about what this means for the rest of us. For the fans who grew up watching these legends, who admired their grace and their grit, who believed that golf was different, this story is a mirror. It reflects something uncomfortable about the world we live in. Loyalty is becoming optional. Respect is becoming conditional. The bonds that used to hold communities together, whether in golf or in life, are stretching thin. And when someone like Gary Player, someone who embodied those old values, says his heart is broken, it is not just a personal statement. It is a warning. A warning that we are losing something we may never get back. But here is the thing. Gary Player is not giving up on golf. He is giving up on one person. He still believes in the game. He still plays. He still talks about the joy of competition and the beauty of a well-struck shot. He is not bitter. He is not angry. He is just done with one chapter. And maybe that is the lesson in all of this. You can love something without loving everything about it. You can respect someone without agreeing with their choices. You can hold on to your values without expecting everyone else to hold on to theirs. Gary Player has done that. He has drawn a line. He has said, "This is where I stand, and I am not moving." That is the kind of clarity that only comes with age, and it is the kind of clarity that commands respect, whether you agree with him or not. So where does that leave Phil Mickelson? Phil is 55 years old. He still plays. He still competes. He still has fans who adore him and critics who cannot stand him. He has made his choices, and he is living with the consequences. Whether he regrets any of it, we may never know. He has not said, and maybe he never will. But one thing is clear. The relationship between Gary Player and Phil Mickelson, the mentorship, the friendship, the mutual respect, that is over. Gary has closed that door, and at 90, he is not opening it again. That is the finality of this statement. That is why it matters. Not because Gary said something shocking or revealed a secret, but because he drew a line in the sand and said, "Enough." Now, before we wrap this up, I want to hear from you. Do you think Gary Player was too harsh? Or do you think he was right to speak his truth, even if it meant ending a decades-long relationship? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. And if you made it this far, if you stuck with me through this whole story, thank you. That means you care about golf the way I do. Not just the scores and the swings, but the people, the history, the emotions that make this game so much more than a sport. If that sounds like you, hit that subscribe button. Because this channel is for fans who want the real stories, the ones that do not make the highlight reels, the ones that make you think, the ones that break your heart and put it back together. Gary Player said his final word on Phil Mickelson, but this conversation is far from over, and I want you to be part of it. So here is where we leave it. A 90-year-old legend, a broken heart, and a friendship that could not survive the weight of change. That is the story. That is the truth. And that is why those three words will echo through golf history for a long, long time. This broke my heart. And honestly, it breaks mine too.